Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Jacksonville Jaguars Insider Podcast. My name is John Shipley. I am your host and beat reporter, and I have been your beat reporter, covering the Jacksonville Jaguars for On SI every single day since August 2019, and we are continuing to move forward through yet another offseason together. All right, folks, welcome to today's episode of the Jacksonville Jaguars Insider Podcast. My name is John Shipley. Today, we are talking about the Jacksonville Jaguars and the franchise tag. The franchise tag deadline came and went, and the Jaguars stood pat and made no move, as was expected. Now, we've been reporting for some time that the Jaguars weren't expected to place the franchise tag on Travis Etienne. There's been no momentum on that front. Regardless of any sour grapes out there about us reporting it, and obviously the obviousness even of the report, but fans were asking about it, and the window was near. So at the end of the day, the Jaguars not using the tag for the second year in a row. I think that, obviously, more than the second year in a row, third year in a row, but obviously they haven't used it in the James Gladstone era yet. Mostly because it really hasn't been applicable yet. I think that, obviously last year there were no franchise tag candidates. And now this year, I think people externally made them sound like candidates, them as an Etienne and Devin Lloyd. But I don't think internally it was ever much of an option. And it's pretty clear why, on both fronts. So we'll just start with the Travis Etienne front. Now, I know a running back did get tagged on Tuesday. Breece Hall with the New York Jets. Two completely different situations. I don't think they should be compared. Very talented players, probably near in the same tier as running backs. I'd imagine on an open market, their value probably would not be all too different. But why did Breece Hall get franchise tagged, and why did it make no sense for Travis Etienne to? The teams that they're on in their situations. The Jets have money to burn. The Jets have too much cap space to know what to do with. Not that many stars and top-tier players are becoming free agents anymore. So, obviously, they're going to spend money this offseason, but they might not even have a host of real enticing options to spend it on. And then there is clearly the fact that they don't have many internal options to spend on. They have very few very good players. The ones that do have, who they didn't ship off, for the most part right now, either on rookie deals or they've already been paid. So the Jets have no reason to not franchise tag Breece Hall. They don't want to let one of their only good players leave, especially one of their only good players on the offensive side of the ball. Despite it being obvious that Hall would rather play anywhere else on this planet Earth. But it is very clear that the Jets, they can afford that tag. They are in a dramatically different cap situation than the Jaguars, who do not have money to burn, who do have other players who are set to receive potential offers in the coming months and years that the Jaguars need to think about to set aside money for. The Jets don't have any of those players. The Jets can set aside money for Breece Hall. Who are they paying? They're hopefully paying their offensive tackles. I think if you're the Jaguars, obviously, and this is speaking, to the ETN point, I think that once and for all, the Jaguars don't need to use the tag to get bogged down in these things. Whether it was Cam Robinson, whether it was Josh Hines-Allen, Evan Ingram, the Jaguars were frequently in the past using the tag as a placeholder for contract negotiations, essentially giving them the room to kick the can down the road and deal with them, negotiation later instead of having to do it right then and there in March before the league year starts. The Jaguars have had to do that for years. This year, maybe Jacoby Myers would have been a tag candidate in the past. Maybe Cole Van Lannon would have been a tag candidate in the past. The Jaguars clearly made it a priority to resign both of them to ensure that they never got into that conversation. So I think moving forward, that's what you can expect out of this Jaguars regime. That's not to say they'll never use a tag. The Rams used a tag a few times. LaMarcus Joyner. I want to say on Trumaine Johnson. So it's not as if the Rams had never used it, but that was a different lifetime ago, practically. That was a decade ago. The league has changed. The numbers have changed dramatically since then. And if you're the Jaguars, there are some players that I think you want to set aside money for. Trayvon Walker. I think we're all expecting Trayvon Walker to get an extension, whether this offseason or during the season next year, like Jacoby Myers and Cole Van Lannon did. I don't think anybody has ever doubted that. I don't think anybody has thought that the Jaguars are going to let him, depart and go elsewhere. But if the Jaguars don't get a deal done this offseason, and if they don't get one during the regular season next year, he's a guy who I can very easily see the Jaguars putting the tag on, if it comes to that. Who knows if it does? But I'd imagine the Jaguars, in no reality, want to let Trayvon Walker play for any other team. And defensive ends very, very frequently get franchise tagged. Pass rushers, edge rushers, whatever you want to call it. It wouldn't be a new thing in really any respect. So I think Brendan Strange may be a name to consider. Though, again, I'd expect, as we've said, for them to work with him, potentially get a deal done. But if not, the tight end franchise tag probably won't be all that much next season. I mean, this year, it was amongst the lowest franchise tags. And I don't really see that changing. So those are the two names I think to look for, if you're talking about if the Jaguars will use the franchise tag at any point, maybe those two guys. Beyond that, I don't think many other candidates exist. And that, of course, lastly brings us to Devin Lloyd. Devin Lloyd now, there's nothing the Jaguars can do to force him away from the free agency market. They can obviously attempt to resign him. But Devin Lloyd has zero reason whatsoever to even look at a contract offer from the Jaguars right now. Devin Lloyd has all the leverage in the world. Devin Lloyd can enter free agency in next week's legal tampering period and let the market speak for him. See which teams are interested in bringing them on. So several that make sense. I think the Washington Commanders make sense. I think the Cincinnati Bengals make sense. I think the Dallas Cowboys make sense. I mean, Sports Illustrated, put out their contract projections. They had him at 3 years, $60 million. I think several teams could be willing to pay that in this free agency cycle where there aren't many blue chip players. He's not necessarily one either, but he's at least one that a team I think could talk themselves into. So it's leverage in this situation. Leverage doesn't really exist because nobody expected the Jaguars to franchise tag him. Nobody's been expecting them to retain him. But in the event it did, if the Jaguars were a team that was working toward making that a possibility, then the ball's now in his court. This was the Jaguars' complete and really only chance to make sure neither one of these guys hits what looks like it's going to be a very, very strong market for both of them. Kenneth Walker didn't get tagged as well, so we will see, what happens on that front in terms of the running back market. But one way or another, expected outcome for Jacksonville? Absolutely. Nobody thought otherwise. But an important day and an important deadline for them to go ahead and just let pass, without question. Thank you guys for joining today's episode of the Jacksonville Jaguars Insider Podcast. My name is John Shipley. We'll be back next time.